Today I have my friend Houston Mooneyham with us. Houston, I'm so thrilled that you're here with us. Houston, share a little bit about what you're up to these days and who you are.
Yeah, my name's Houston, like you said. I've got a beautiful wife, a son, and I've actually been self-employed for 7 years now. I'm an insurance broker for Medicare products, but also as of recently, I started getting into real estate investing and also business consulting as well. So I do some coaching on the side, those other things that I'm working on. So yeah,
Houston, where I want to go today is that I've known you, how long have we known each other now? 12, 13,
man,
14 years?
since 2013, so 11
Man,
years. Yeah.
I feel like we've grown up and matured so much together and over the years. And so there's something about you I've noticed, and it reminds me of this. There's a gentleman that I met with. He and I have a mutual friend, and he said, "Hey, Chris, here's our mutual friend. I want to grab a cup of coffee with you." And because of the relationship, without very much question, I said, "Let's grab a cup of coffee." And that's what we did. And he asked me a question that was just interesting. He goes, "Chris, I just observe you, and it seems like whatever you set your mind to do, you go and do it. It's like you always do exactly what it is that you purpose yourself to do." And he was like, "Tell me more about that. How do you do that?" And so it made an interesting conversation. And the reason I'm bringing that up right now is, Houston, I feel the same way about you. One thing that I've picked up on about you, other than your passion for your wife and your son Hunter and your family and your faith, is that it seems like whatever you set yourself, whenever you decide, I'll use that word. Whenever you decide to do something, it's like you go and do that. You operate from a place of drive and passion. And I'm curious. I would like to talk more about, like, where does that drive or passion come from, Houston?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've noticed that about yourself too. It
Mm.
seems like, over the past 11 years that we've known each other, it seems like, we've had tons of conversations. Not a lot of people know the backstory, on what's going on the backside of everything. But it seems like you've always got something rolling in your mind and you don't take a second off. You're just always going for something new. So I've admired that about you. And I think honestly, you've modeled that for me. Because, as someone who's a creator, has a visionary mindset, we have that part down, but it's the putting things into play and getting things going that sometimes there's a struggle there. And so I've seen you throughout the years not only dream, but make things happen. And so I can see exactly what that guy was talking about who had coffee with you that day. And that's something that I try to do with my life too. I think back to the first memory I have of, being driven to do something and being motivated would have been in seventh grade. Okay. So going back to middle school, I had a teacher and she was a challenging teacher for me. Okay. I didn't love school already, but she said something to me that it like flipped a switch inside of me. Right. And she said, and it's not good that a teacher probably says this to, any student, but for me, it worked. Right. I don't know what her motivation was. I don't know if she was having a bad day or if she knew it would do something positive in my life. But she said, Houston, she had me stay in for lunch because I had gotten in trouble in class. And she said, Houston, you're never going to do anything in life. The most you'll ever do is you'll ask people if they would like fries with that when they're ordering a cheeseburger,
Whoa.
right? And I remember the feeling that just overwhelmed me was, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I'd never felt that before. But it started then, and that is a memory that is tattooed in my mind. And it's really the theme of my life is I'm living a life where I want to prove every single person wrong who has an opinion about me that's not the way I see myself or the way that God sees me. So
Mm.
that's really what gets me going. I don't know if I have a chip on my shoulder, but not only do I dream, I just want to prove, not because I have anything to prove, but I do know that I have something down inside of me that God put there and I want to make it happen. And I want to get that reaction out of people. So anyway,
Wow.
that's what drives me.
That's pretty incredible, Houston.
Yeah.
I've heard before that sometimes there's a pattern between people that have a sense of urgency and a drive for just overall success in life, is that oftentimes the common denominator is they have a chip on their shoulder. There was
Hmm.
somebody that belittled them, talked down to them,
Yeah.
and they walk around with a chip on their shoulder, meaning, hey, watch this. I'm going to prove you wrong. I could relate to that, Houston.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, man. So, tell us more about that, right? So, say somebody is out there listening and they're like, okay, I see what you're saying with that. And yet, what would be some of the advice that you have for someone listening that maybe there's a gap, meaning they have some vision for their life about what they would do, like to do or accomplish, and yet then they look at their calendar this week and think, man, I'm so far from that. I'm not taking any steps. Like, how would you coach that person? What would you have to say?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what I would say is this. I've heard the phrase perception is reality a lot
Mm.
throughout my life,
Hmm.
and I'd like to push back on that phrase and and I would reword it a little bit and I would say perception is their reality, right? It's not yours. It doesn't matter what people think about you, what they say about you, how they feel about you.
Right.
And to a degree, you want to make sure that you're in, good standing with the people that are around you. However, people's limiting beliefs that they place on you is not your reality. Okay. And so even if you look around and you see things that you're, not necessarily happy with in your life, that you see that there needs to be changes, man, that reality that you're sitting in is not the reality that maybe God has for you because he has a big plan for you, right? And just because you don't see something happening right now does not mean that it's not going to happen in the future and doesn't mean that you could start making moves right now to level up. And so, yeah, my pushback would be their perception is their reality. And then also, if you want to make a change in your life, you're the only one holding yourself back. You know what I
Right.
mean? All you have to do is make that first change. And sometimes that's the most challenging thing is taking that first step. But
Yeah.
I promise you, taking that first step is actually much easier and much simpler than sitting back and hanging out in your old ways because you're just going to keep getting what, you're surrounded with at that moment. But if you take that one step, it's actually a lot easier than people think. Yeah.
So going back, okay, it was 2011, 2012 when ours path crossed at a church, the river in Kansas City, or
Yep.
Raytown, actually, suburb of
Yep.
KP.
Yeah.
And boy, a lot of life has happened since then,
A
right?
whole lot. A whole lot. Yeah.
100%. And so I'm curious, like looking back over the past 12, 13 years, Houston, what's some of the lessons that you've learned looking back? They're going to be some of the big lessons that looking back that are now clear. And here's why I
Mm.
ask that is because sometimes going through things, not everything that feels bad is bad, and not everything that feels good is good. Sometimes I need some perspective, meaning I could look back over the past decade and this thing that happened or this challenge I went through that felt challenging and bad at the time actually worked out really well for me.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's
Yeah.
because of the lesson I learned or who I became as a result of that experience by identifying the lesson. So, man, let's go back to you and I meeting. What's some of the things that you've learned
Yeah.
over the past decade or so?
Yeah, I'll say this, man. I will say that, our time that we met there at the river in
Mm-hmm.
Raytown, it was a transitional period of my life, and, I think back, reading the Bible, thinking about Paul, and he counts all things as joy. I mean, that guy was getting beat up, imprisoned, and, life wasn't great by any means, but he counted everything as joy. And so honestly, during that time, I didn't know, I hadn't really gone through that lesson yet, but it was a tough transition time for me. And so, but now looking back, there are so many setbacks and transitions in my life, looking back over the past 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it be, and I'm so grateful for the tough times and for the transitions and for the setbacks because really they position me to be where I'm at today and they'll continue doing that into my future. And so, a big lesson besides that I learned is, I grew up, my dad was a pastor, and I caught this love for Jesus at a young age. And then when got into high school, I kind of veered off a little bit, but he brought me back when I was about 19 years old, and I got this fire to be in ministry, right? And so I became a pastor at that church. And really, I thought for the rest of my life, at that moment, I thought, I'm going to retire being a pastor. I'm going to do this for the long haul. This is what God's called me to do. And, If I could give somebody another piece of advice, it would be just because you feel like God's calling you to ministry does not mean that he's calling you to be a pastor.
Mm,
Ministry is a very, very broad term. But at the time, I was still immature in my faith and my walk in life, really. And I thought, oh, ministry, I've got a passion for God. I'm going to go and be a pastor. And, sitting here 11 years later, I am so happy and so content, yet motivated that I'm not a pastor anymore. In that context of being at a local church, being a pastor and preaching and doing everything that comes along with that, I am so fulfilled in my life right now that I'm just so grateful for that transition 11 years ago.
So a few terms. When you say veered off, you described your father being a pastor, and then you veered off and came back around. What do you mean
Yeah.
veered off?
Yeah, that's awesome. So I love it. This is part of my story. I was raised in an awesome Christian home, great values, great foundation, and
Hmm.
it's all I knew. And I got to high school and I was confronted with different ways of life, different culture, different ideas. And, I only knew one way. And so, my foundation was strong enough to where I came back. However, I did dabble in some things that I shouldn't have when I was a teenager. And, that'd be underage drinking. And so, I mean, I can go down the list. There's several things that I consumed and became a part of that I'm not super proud of, but they're part of who I am. And so I followed that lifestyle, and it lasted me about 3 or 4 years before I was confronted with, you know, I was driving home from the gym and I was confronted by God, really. Um, I don't know really what came over me other than the Holy Spirit, but I was driving in my truck and I was just overwhelmed with emotion. At that point in my life, I knew that there was probably a God because of where I came from. However, everything in my life was blurry. I didn't have a future that was clear in my mind. I didn't have any really motivation to be or do anything. And I remember I just broke down and I got so angry and I yelled and I said, God, if you're real, I need you to change my life because I can't do it.
Mm,
And so, when I veered off and I was doing things that I shouldn't have been doing, as a believer, I said I was a Christian, I was still going to church. However, I wasn't living the life and I didn't have a vision for my future. And so when I was confronted that day, my whole life changed. And so I would say that was really my salvation experience.
mm.
But yeah, so hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense. What about ministry, right? Because sometimes
Yeah.
we could be using the same words, but two different dictionaries.
Oh,
So when you say
absolutely.
ministry, like
Yeah.
what is ministry, man? I know it can look different to different people.
Yeah. Love God, love people, and make God
Yeah,
known. You know what I mean?
that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
heard our friend David Higginbotham, who we both know, one thing he helped me with my language on this one, and I just took his language and use it now. Is ministry can happen anytime loving God and loving people come together. So
100%.
it doesn't matter if it's in a coffee shop, a real estate office, in the insurance industry.
Yeah.
Anytime loving God and loving people comes together, ministry can happen.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So what else? You shared about the experience of venturing off path, meaning, and it's kind of like a toddler, right? I'm reminded of different seasons, and your son Hunter, you're seeing this where there's different seasons he'll have, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where it's kind of like maturity and growth,
Hmm.
right? So it sounds like you were growing up, you were fumbling around just like many of us do in our teenage years on the journey to into manhood.
Yeah.
And eventually you decided you wanted to go a different path. You leaned into your faith and it
Hmm.
became more real for you. And what was next?
Yeah, what was next was, I was in college. So
Okay.
I was in my freshman year of college and
It's
I
so funny
still
thinking about you in college, man. Like I know you're a reader. Matter of fact, I have a book in my trunk that I still have not fully read.
Yeah.
And yet it's hard for me to imagine you sitting in this classroom like all day long listening to some type of teacher share a lecture. And yet go carry on.
Yeah, I have my own opinions about that. So maybe another podcast
Fair
we can
enough.
talk about college a little bit.
Okay.
I don't want to sway people's opinions or go on a tangent here. However, I
Yeah.
was going that route because I was taught that, and no fault to my parents. I mean, this is just society, it's culture
Mhm.
that in high school you make good grades so you can go to a good college, right? So you can
Right.
graduate and get a piece of paper, say I accomplished something, and then turn that into wherever you're going to work to say I'm qualified for a job. And so that's how you build, that's the American dream, so that you start going on this path and it takes you somewhere. And hopefully by the time you're 65, you can retire and look back and say, I did something great with my life. Um, I don't believe that anymore. But again, that's another subject. My path has been different and I'm so grateful for it. And I want to encourage anybody who's listening who's kind of in that position where you're maybe in high school or you're wrestling with the idea of what happens next. You don't have to do what society or what culture tells you you're supposed to do. You can make your own path and be successful and live a really fulfilling life.
Mhm. It's good.
And yeah, and so I don't really remember what your question was, but there
Passionate.
you go. I'm very
Yeah,
passionate about it.
I think it's just good to know to know your options, right? You and I
Yeah.
have talked about this in consulting people. We want to walk them through their options so they can make the best educated decision for them and their family.
Oh, for sure.
It's
Yeah.
no different. And yet my concern is is there's not just A or B. That's
Yeah.
not an option. That's a dilemma, right? You
Yeah.
turn left
Yeah.
or not. And yet, like my daughter Shaylee, she's going to college. She's there as we speak today, actually. And however, it's required for what she's interested in to be a family counselor,
Yeah.
right? So I would say if you have a profession where you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, a family counselor, like there's probably a path that makes sense. And
Yeah.
yet there's plenty other options if you don't feel compelled to go down the traditional schooling route.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, if I
Yeah,
was going to a doctor or a family, counselor or
man,
whatever, and they didn't have the background experience, the knowledge and how to perform,
100%.
I wouldn't be going there. So
Oh,
yes, in
yeah.
that case, 100%. That's great for
Man,
her.
I want to
Yeah.
see that certificate up on the wall that says, just like this
Right.
book right here, Harvard Business School, Boston.
Yeah.
I want to see that degree up on the wall if you're the doctor,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah. If I'm the
Okay,
doctor and it
so
says I graduated from Houston Mooneyham University,
that's
that's
what's up.
not a good sign. Yeah.
Fair enough, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Best weekend class ever to become a doctor.
Oh, for
Point
sure.
is this. Okay, so let's pick up where we left off with you going down the path of traditional college.
Okay.
Carry on with that.
Yeah, so it was between semesters in college.
Okay.
I guess it's fall semester, and then going in after Christmas break and hitting the spring semester is basically what it is,
Mhm.
right? The
Okay.
fall semester, I was living it up. I was still in that phase of going down whatever path I thought was best for me. I was
Okay.
confronted by God, and everything changed. And this is during that Christmas break, right? It's that Christmas
Is this when you
spirit
sold
got
your
me.
high top and threw away the Nelly CDs?
Get rid of it. No,
Okay.
actually, I was still into that. I was still into
Fair
that a
enough.
little bit.
Okay.
God did tell me to delete the music, so I did do that. However, the high tops, I mean, they still remain. I'm still wearing the high
Right.
tops. Yeah,
You're not
yeah,
new to it. You're true to it. I'm with you.
that's right for life. So anyway, I said, you know what, I'm leaving, the current college I was at. I'm going to Bible college because I'm gonna be a pastor, right?
Okay.
And I was advised by everyone at my college who I went through the process of disenrolling, meeting with counselors and meeting with, tuition and all that. And I was advised every turn I made, don't do it. There's no money in ministry, and you're never going to have the life you want to have if you go into ministry, right? I
Hey.
was told that. And so here I am, thinking back to seventh grade, the teacher who told me I was going to ask people if they want fries with that. I was never going to do anything with my life. I said, well, I'm going to prove you wrong then. So peace. I'm leaving here. I'm going to Bible college, right? And so I was in Bible college for about a year and a half. And then I was presented with an opportunity to be a youth pastor at a local church. And that's where we met.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that was my path through, higher education, college, transferring to Bible college, and then becoming a
Mhm.
pastor. Yeah.
Okay. What
Yeah.
was next then? Any lessons from that experience that you want to highlight for us?
Yeah. Yeah. Without outing my mom, I'll just go ahead and do it. I
Sorry,
ended up
Mom.
becoming a pastor. I became a pastor, and the pastor at the church at the time said, you're going to school to, get your degree and get your certificate to be a
Right.
pastor. However, we can do that here. You're already doing the thing. We'll just,
Oh,
we'll take you through the classes and we'll get it done for you.
yeah.
So, you can finish going to Bible college if you want to. However, we got the same thing right here, and you're not going
Is
to pay
this
anything to do
where
it.
you and I were taking the same class on Saturday mornings?
It is. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, to
Yeah.
be
Yep.
that was to get our through a denomination to get our, what was it called, certification or
Certification, license, minister.
licensing process, right?
Yeah.
Through
Yep.
Foursquare. Okay, got it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yep.
at that time, I started to weigh my options here. I had a
Yeah.
few options. I could continue going to college. I could, I guess I had a dilemma really because there were only two. I could
Okay.
keep going and get
Working
my,
code.
yeah, I could keep going and do my thing at college, or I could just get my certificate and my licensed, minister deal
Hmm.
at the church I was at. So I thought about it. I'm like, pay money or not to get the same thing. I'm going to go this route and just, leave college altogether and get my license here at the church. And so I remember presenting that to my parents. Hey, this is what I'm going to do. And man, that was difficult. I was still living at home, and, my, I was always taught and I was in the idea frame that going to college was very important. Right. And, we only know what we know at the time. And I'm sure, looking back, I've had conversations with my parents and they're super proud. They're glad that I went the route that I went. But at the time, it's scary, right? You don't know any different. You don't know what the result is going to be when your kid says, I'm going to drop out of college, you know?
Right.
And so I ended up, leaving the Bible college I was at and became a pastor. And that was a big shift in the home because I was still living at my house with my parents. And that was hard. I mean, I don't know if they fully agreed with it. There was some pushback, but ultimately I felt like that was what was best for my life. And looking back, I'm grateful. It saved me money. And also I'm not a pastor at that church anymore. However, it set me up for where I'm at now. So I'm grateful for the journey that I've been on.
It's so good.
Yeah,
What was next after that then?
man. So being a pastor at 22 years old,
Hmm.
boy, like you gotta make sure God's saying do this. And I believe God was saying do it, But if you're not for sure and you're just doing it because it feels right, man, really talk to the Lord about it and find out. Because it's a lot. I mean, man, it was a tough season. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I was young. And so I found myself in a position where I was just tough. I ended up ultimately having to leave, and not because I was fired, thank God, but I think I did a pretty good job. I developed good relationships. I had a great time while I was there. However, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, you know. And so transitioning out of that, I got a job at a local pool store in Blue Springs. I ended up moving to Blue Springs, and I got a job at a pool store there, and that was tough, man. It was such a great opportunity. They extended a helping hand. They knew that I just, transferred out and, had a transition in my life. And they said, Houston, we want you to come work here. And my wife was already working there. And so it was a good fit. And man, it was such a blessing. However, it was very hard. From going from a position where you have authority of some sort, people look to you for advice, for counsel, and then going to where you're working a 9 to 5, loading up pool chemicals and selling hot tubs. It was tough, man. It was so tough. I call it my quarter life crisis, honestly. And
Corporate life.
because, man, it was tough. I called it that at the time too. It's funny now looking back at it, but man, at the time it was hard. I couldn't sleep. I I lost my appetite. I became depressed to some extent, just because it was such a change. And I was really disappointed, because the last few years prior, my idea was I was going to be a pastor in the local church for the rest of my life. And when that all changed, I'm like, what in the world is going on with my life? God, what's happening? I don't know what to even think or do anymore. So that was a tough deal for me, but it taught me so much. One thing that it taught me that I'll remember for the rest of my life, and I apply it to every area of my life now, is this: that ministry it's not limited to the local church setting. So like you said, your friend David, great guy, love God, love people, and you can make it happen anywhere.
Right.
Whatever the quote was, it's true. It's absolutely true. I learned that everywhere I go, I'm a walking, talking vessel for the Lord, and I can fulfill my call in ministry no matter the context, no matter. And so he was bringing opportunities up, and I mean it was a great time. It was a challenging time, but I learned a lot.
It's not too uncommon for, I go to church on Sundays with my family, and we've gone for years, and my point is that this word calling, it's
Yeah.
common, and yet if somebody's not familiar with that word, what does calling mean? Because we're not talking about like picking up the phone and calling. What do you mean by
Yeah.
calling?
Yeah. So I believe that everyone has unique wiring, unique skill sets, unique
Yeah.
ideas and passions that the Lord places inside of them, right? Every single person has them, whether they know it or not. They're buried deep down inside. And honestly, until you find out what those things are, you'll never actually be fulfilled in life.
Mm.
And so, I struggled because I knew that there was something there. However, I didn't know exactly what it was. I couldn't put my finger on it. And since I couldn't really figure out what it was, there was a wrestle, there was a struggle. Like God, I know that you've put things inside of me, but I don't know what they are. I don't know why there's fireworks going on behind me.
I know that's wild. I don't know if that's a
That's that's
it was
that's the
fun.
Lord
Let's just
right
keep
there.
going with that.
Yeah,
Purpose,
that's
fireworks, plan for
yeah,
life. Go.
right.
That's what
Yeah,
happens when you
so
discover your purpose. Fireworks go
that's
off.
right. Man, it's deep down inside of you, and just really just seek God on what fires you up and make that your whole life. Honestly,
Man,
because now the things that really get me going, I use those things in everything that I do in my life. They're not limited to a certain setting. It's who I am
Mhm.
now. You know what I mean? And so when you tap into that, life is limitless. It really
Mhm.
is. Yeah,
Houston, I think it's important to pay attention to. I'm obviously passionate about purpose, right? I wrote a book, The Path to Purpose,
that's right.
because I feel like my life purpose is to encourage and inspire others to pursue their purpose. And when it comes to purpose, I think about these types of questions. What is
Yeah.
it that causes me to cry besides stubbing my toe, right? Like
Hmm.
what keeps me up at late at night? What's the problem that I see in the world around me that if I could wave a magic wand and solve it, I would be fulfilled, or it's important to me. So sometimes answering those types of questions or
Yeah.
considering those types of questions can be helpful to discover what is that creative way that, because I agree, each one of us has a creative part of us that gets back to God's original intent for our life, because it does say that he has a plan and purpose for our life. What is it, Jeremiah 23? For I know the
29:11
plans I
maybe.
have for you, says the Lord,
29:11.
plans to prosper you, give you hope in a future, so
Yep.
on and so forth. And what I love about that, that implies that God has a plan and purpose for your life, that in the giftings, what's it say? The giftings and call of God are irrevocable. What
Yep. In
that means to
Romans. Yep.
me is that I can't mess it up, right? I might be able to delay it. I might make it harder than it needs to be, but God's not going to change his mind about the original purpose, the very reason he created me to be here today in 2024 or
Yep.
whatever year it is.
Yep. So two things, and usually when I say two things, I forget one. So hopefully I don't. There's balloons. What in the world?
That's fun.
All right.
Okay.
So two things. Um, your passion that's inside of you. Whenever you start to discover what that is, it always has to do with serving other people. You always bring value to someone else's life. That's key. That's what everybody's unique giftings are that are inside of them. It brings value to someone else, right? And when you bring value to someone else, it also glorifies God. And so when you do those two things, that's when you're ultimately fulfilled in life. Whenever you can add value to someone else and it glorifies God in the process. It always will when you're adding value. And so that's what brings fulfillment.
That's so
Number
good.
two, I actually remembered this one. Number two is that verse in Romans, the gifts and callings of God are irrevocable. I've explained it this way over the years. It's like a ball and chain, right? You cannot outrun, you cannot escape the fact that God has something for you. And no matter how hard you run away, no matter how fast you try and run, whatever, you're always going to be dragging it right behind you. It will not leave you. It cannot leave you. It's stuck with you. It's part of who you are. And so, for me, when I said I veered off in high school, those things were inside of me, and I tried to go a different way, and it just didn't work out because God had a different plan for my life. And that's the same thing he's got for everybody else. That unique thing that he's placed inside of you, you're never going to get away from.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we could a buddy of mine, Matt, who I had on the show, he's going to be one of our keynote speakers at our event in
Yeah.
Kansas City next month.
Yep.
And he brought this up. We've heard of rock bottom, right? When all hell breaks loose and we've never been in a more low spot than where we are, it's referred to as a rock bottom. He
Yeah.
mentioned rock top. So sometimes we could have all the success and we could have all the things happen where it's like we feel like we're at the top of the mountain, and yet it's interesting to discover once we reach to the top of the mountain, we don't feel this sense of fulfillment, right? So when I think about purpose and vision, because purpose ultimately what it does is the purpose of purpose is it comes down to serving God and serving people. Really, that's the purpose of our purpose, and yet
Yep.
we end up doing that in unique ways because we're uniquely different, meaning there's gifts and talents placed inside of us, right?
Yep.
My wife is very similar to our daughters, very into the details, which is good because my mind is, I just had this conversation. We had a family meeting with some extended family recently, and we pulled in, and they said they gave me some feedback as far as my listening or lack of listening skills. And I shared with them, I said, hey, I'm not making excuses. However, the goal is to understand each other. In my mind is like, I'm thinking we have this event in Kansas City, right? Already, I'm working, planning out the event in January or in December, the goal setting retreat. Then I'm also already, I have January's event already planned out with guest speakers. I'm working on
Mm.
June's guest speaker list. And so I just shared with them, like, number one, thank you for bringing that up. Number two is the challenge that I have where it's a challenge and it's the opportunity, because sometimes I could be sitting there and yet I'm thinking about second quarter event planning and next year, and here we are, mid 2024. And so I asked
Yeah.
for their patience and all of that. My point is that each one of us has giftings. Maybe
Hmm.
you're like me, you're visionary, you think about the future. And the neat thing is it's neat to see how God surrounds us with others that are strong in other areas, right? So you
Yeah.
better believe that it does me some good in my household as a family unit to have a wife who's into the details, that plans things and is that makes sure nothing gets missed. We're a great partnership, a great fit for each other for many of reasons. What's my point? I guess my point is two things, Houston. I got two things too.
There we go.
Number one is we have the things that we're good at and the things that we're not so good at. We actually need each other.
Hmm.
And that's point number two is we need each other. We need each other to fulfill our purpose. We're not going to fulfill our purpose, the vision, the plan God has for our life in isolation for ourselves. And it gets back to the beginning. So that's number three now. Number three is right at the beginning. We needed a helper. It's not good for man to be alone. I think it means more than just a man needs a wife. We actually need each other as human beings.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what
100%.
was okay? So transitioning from swim things, youth pastor, what was next for you then?
Yeah. What was next for me? So I was at Swim Things, and this is a story I've never shared before. So
Ooh,
yeah, this is fun to share this on the podcast. But
okay.
what was next for me was this. I had plans for my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
My wife, we had plans for our life together, and the current spot that I was at did not fulfill the need that we had in order to accomplish those things, right? So we had things that we wanted to do in life, and where I was currently at wasn't going to get us from point A to point B. Okay.
Tell us a little more about that. Like, in what way?
Yeah. So income was a big
Oh,
one,
got it.
right?
Okay.
So here's the thing. My wife, and we talked about this all throughout our relationship. We wanted to have her stay home and to
Hmm.
raise our son, right? And so we didn't want to just both be working and he's in daycare and someone else raises him. We wanted to take responsibility and nurture and, to, I guess, a lack of a better word is be a good steward of what God had given us and a gift of a son. We wanted to make sure that we were stewarding that well. And, for some people it doesn't work out, but for us, that was the deep desire of ours for my wife to stay home. And so where I was currently at, I just was not making enough money for that to happen. So I had to make a move. There was another transition there, right? And so I had to take a big, big risk into jumping into something new that I wasn't familiar with, that had potential really big upside to fulfill the dreams that we had for our life. And so I was presented with an opportunity to get into insurance, right? And it was 100% commission, and that scared me to death. I mean, even though I wasn't making the money I desired to have currently at that time, and it wasn't going to bring us what we wanted in life, it still was a guaranteed paycheck. I knew that I was going to get paid a certain amount every couple of weeks, and we could plan what our life was going to look like based on that budget, right? And I was scared, man. I was scared. The upside was great with insurance, but it was all commission. I'd never done that before, and it scared me. And so, I the biggest thing, the most important thing that we can do in our life is take risks. If you're not willing to take risks, you're never gonna do anything really, because most people are comfortable with just sitting back and taking life as it comes and sitting back into what's comfortable and familiar. However, if you have dreams and goals that are on your heart and mind, if you want to see those things happen, it's going to take not just a step of faith, but it's going to take a leap sometimes, right? And
Right.
so I jumped into it full force. I'm like, I got to make it happen. I really don't have much to lose. I know that I could replace that income if I had to and go find something else. However, I'm going to take a big risk here and go 100% commission and see what I can do. And the thoughts, the memories of Houston, you're not going to be anything in life. Houston, you just don't have the skill set, whatever the case was, of people saying things to me throughout my life up to that point, they fueled something inside of me. That feeling started to come back. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it better than anybody expects. And sure enough, I mean, my first year in insurance, I tripled my income that I made the year before. Thank you, man. I mean, and it took that big leap. What I was scared of, I had to face that and move forward because I knew it would benefit my family in the long run, right? And so it allowed my wife the opportunity to step away from her position there. We had a beautiful baby, and she's been able to stay home and fulfill what she felt her calling was and what God had asked her to do by raising our son. So yeah, big win.
Man, that's so good, Houston. I had a
Yeah.
conversation with a gentleman a few months ago, and he and I were sitting across eating some food together, and he was sharing with me about he and his wife starting to have children, and his wife had a strong desire to stay home, and he just couldn't bring
Yeah.
himself to do what it took to make that happen financially for them.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating is he shared this story as if they just had their first kid yesterday. I know this man. They have several children, all college age, well into their 20s, and yet I could just hear the pain in his heart and the regret in his tone and the tears in his eyes as he was sharing the regret of looking back. He wished he would have done what it took to bet on himself that he would be able to provide financially for him and his children. So I think number
Yeah.
one, I just want to highlight good for you on that, Houston, because if it were easy, everybody would do it. And there's you and I have talked about this before. There's a difference between want, desire, and passion.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
list of people that want things, it's long, right? Just think about that genie in the bottle, right? The Aladdin from the 90s, right? You rub the bottle, poofy pops out, you get three wishes. Point
Yep.
is, there's a long list, a long line of people that want things. The
Hmm.
difference is going to be do they desire things? Desire means that they're willing to actually move their feet, take some action. But the catch is the move from want to desire, they're only willing to take action if it's easy and convenient and comfortable. Where the
Hmm.
magic happens is when we get passionate. And what you were passionate. You were more passionate about providing the life you desire with your wife for your son and your household. You were more
Yeah.
passionate about that than the fear of failure and all the other feelings that could have held you back.
Yeah.
Passion,
Absolutely.
in order to go from desire to passion, we have to be willing to suffer, right? It
Hmm.
comes from
Yep.
Christ. The good news is we don't have to endure as Christ did, obviously, right? We're not going to get tortured on a cross. However, what it means to suffer, be passionate like Christ, willing to suffer, willing to endure, willing to do what's uncomfortable and what doesn't come natural and easy to go after what we're passionate about. So the coaching
Hmm.
question is, you know, one is easy, right? Talk is cheap. Desire, pretty basic too. We're willing to do what's easy and comfortable. But passion is where the magic happens. And we know this as human beings. we could tell when we're talking to somebody that's passionate,
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh,
There's
for
something that
sure.
attracts us that we were lean in, where when somebody's passionate, we could pick up on that. And that's one of the
Hmm.
things that I love about you is that we have similar values because I once went all in betting and trusting that somehow it was all going to work out because we had our third child, Matthew, who you know, and I remember feeling all the pressure. I remember where the market was in Kansas City in 2000 and I think it was 10 or 11 when we made this decision. And after a heated moment where my wife made the comment about how much money we didn't have in the bank, and I remember just being offended and pissed because I felt inadequate. I did
Yeah.
one of those moves where I went upstairs and slammed the door,
Oh
which never
yeah.
goes over well, but it's just where
Yeah.
I was at, unfortunately, at the time.
Right.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
And yet I really did some soul searching and I prayed and I did this. So if you feel stuck out there, if you're listening, you're like, okay, I have a situation where I see the opportunity, I believe, and I believe this is the direction, and yet I'm uncertain, I'm afraid, I'm terrified. I would encourage you to do what I did, which is actually pause and then and pray, ask. This is what it looked like. Jesus, I'm willing to lay down. This is my language. You use yours. Um, Jesus, I'm willing to give up my dreams and aspirations of being an entrepreneur, being in real estate, and I will go get a regular job to get a steady income for my family if that's what you desire for me. Will you help me know your direction and purpose for my life in this season? I'm not moving. I'm not making any changes until you reveal to me in a special way what to do next. And I'll tell you what, that's exactly another story for another day. And yet, Jesus came through. I felt like through watching a manpower conference in 2011, because when I went upstairs in the bedroom, I opened up my MacBook and my internet connected to my computer connected to the internet, refreshed my Facebook page, and Manpower 2011 was going on at the Potter's house at TD Jakes. Two things happened. He was talking about Elijah, about how men are meant to be like eagles, to have a God sized perspective of their life, to fly high over all of the chaos and storms, to have a vision from God for them in their household and their life. Number two thought that came to me. So the first one was I'm going to study Elijah, right? Because I didn't grow up
Yeah.
going to church and I've never read in First or Second Kings about Elijah. So I thought I'm gonna study Elijah, and that's exactly
Yeah.
what I did, and that's where my answer came from. The second thing that happened is that I told myself I'm going to be in that room in 2011. So that's exactly what I did. And it was a special place in my life looking back where 2011, I packed the car and I headed out to Dallas, Texas to go to Manpower 2012 with TD Jakes. And it was
Oh,
one of the most incredible experiences, mostly due to the fact of just being in an environment. Here's a lesson: the environment we choose to place ourselves in makes a big difference,
that's
right?
big.
It
Yep.
shows up with our family, our household. The people the company we choose to keep impact us and shapes and molds us. Yeah, we start to think like them and talk like them, right? Point is this: is I got an environment out in Dallas, Texas that was unlike anything I've ever experienced in a church building, honestly, at the time. And what it was an environment of freedom where some people were raising their hands as worship, some people were laying down. Honestly, there was a few people running around. I'm still not sure what was going on for them, and yet it is what it is. But it
Yeah.
was, I just remember like the tangible feeling of freedom and such a strong sense of expectation where
Mm.
people came from all over the world and they had an expected heart. And one of the things that I've learned is that life tends to meet us at our level of expectation.
Yep.
Life tends to meet us at our level of expectation. I would say God tends to meet with us according to our level of expectation.
Yeah.
Meaning, if I
Yeah.
think I got it, why am I holding an apple? If I got it, hey, it's my life. I got it. I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay, go for it, right?
Yeah.
Or if
Yeah.
it's the posture of, hey, everything that I have is yours, it's a gift from you, anyways.
Hmm.
Show me the next step.
Yeah.
Man, I think God answers and responds to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And something I'd love to piggyback on. You said, your friend Matt said he mentioned the rock top.
rock top.
Right. Dude, that's so true. Because here's why. I've found in my life, and this is a universal thing. This happens in everybody's life. If you're chasing a thing,
Hmm.
Yeah, you may be able to get to the top of that mountain, but you're going to find yourself at a rock top.
Hmm.
Here's what I do. I don't chase anything, right? I don't chase a thing because
Hmm.
here's what I know. There's a principle in the Bible, Matthew 24, about seeking first the kingdom. Here's the thing, man. I seek God, one, obviously, but I self discover. I dig within myself. I find the things that God has already equipped me with, right? Not in fear of, am I going to have, this tomorrow, or am I going to have this in my life, whatever, chasing the things, whether it be money or clothes or food or the life I desire. No, I self discover. I stay centered. I don't chase anything. And the promise is that if you seek God and his kingdom and he places the kingdom inside of us, those things are going to follow after you. I don't chase anything. I let them chase me. I
That's
don't
so
have
good.
the time or the energy to chase after something because most of the time when we're chasing something, it's something that we don't already have, right? Because you want to obtain that. I'd rather focus on the things that God put inside of me. I'm not trying to chase something else. I want this. This is what's unique. This is what God's given me. I want to grow this thing, right? And
Yeah.
so don't chase things, let them chase you. And the process looks like this: seek God and self discover. That's it. That's it.
Man, that's so good, Houston. There's kind of a hustle and grind message out there, right? And where I'm at now in life is I could look back and I could see where I was just out of maybe personality traits, right? High D, driven, ambitious by nature, where it's like, man, I'm not going to knock on a door. I'm going to kick that bad boy down, right? I'm
That's
not going to just
right.
open the window. I'm going to crawl through it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And yet where I'm at now, I'm not so much about hustle and grind, even though, okay, do your thing. I'm more into ebb and flow.
There you
Ebb
go.
and flow.
There you
Yeah.
go. I love it.
Yep.
I love it.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the next thing I want to say, and I don't
Hmm.
know how long we've got, but I really got to say this because I think it's good for anyone listening to this.
Hmm.
You can really, whenever you're going on this path of self discovery, finding out what God has put inside of you, your passion, the way you're wired, things like that. Sometimes the clearest way to see what God's put inside of you is you look, be mindful. What are things that have consistently been said about you that were in a negative light or a negative tone, right?
Hmm.
And I say it because of this. Looking back all through school, I'm going to use school as the example in this one. We got report cards, right? Report cards were either really good for some people or really bad for other people. For me,
Right.
it went back and forth. Like sometimes they were great, sometimes, I was going to get in trouble, right?
Yeah.
So one thing that was always consistent on my report card, there was a note section, right?
Oh yeah.
And it said, he's too talkative, disruptive, and he doesn't follow instructions, right?
Yep.
Those three things that were meant in a negative way about my character and how I operated, those things actually pointed to my greatest strengths.
Hmm.
What people sometimes see as your weakness will be a clear indicator and point directly to what your strengths are. So pay attention to that. Think back. What are some things that people have said, I'm not so great at, right?
Yep.
Because you can take those things and what's the opposite side? Oh, I'm too talkative. Well, guess what? Now I'm in sales and I freaking love it. I love
That's
talking.
right.
My talking makes me money, right?
Right.
Um, does it follow instructions? Yeah, sometimes there's a clear way to do something, but guess what? It's not the way that I'm wired. I want to find a new way to do it. I don't want to do
Yes.
what everybody tells me to do. I want to do it in a new way because I feel like if I can make my own path, blaze my own trail, I maybe can do it better. I just have that thought. And
Yeah.
so what people say are your weaknesses, they're going to point to your greatest strengths ultimately.
Yeah.
So I
It-
wanted to
it-
say that.
I'm glad you did, Houston. It reminds me of the law of polarity, that there's two sides of everything, right? You're not going to see
Yeah.
a one side piece of bread, a
Yeah.
one-sided coin. There's always two sides of everything,
Hmm.
right? So if you could be very unfocused, you could also be incredibly focused,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
that's if your talking can be disruptive, your talking could also be very whatever the opposite would be, right? So in the negative, it could also be very positive,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it goes
Absolutely.
both ways, and I would agree. We could look at we could look at, I guess the common denominator is going to be the teacher's reports cards from first, second, and third grade, and see if there's a pattern because they may have noticed something
Yeah.
that's actually a gift.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's good, Houston. Okay. So how we want to land this plane today, Houston? Where do you want to go from here?
Yeah.
What's
So
next?
I would say my deepest desire, and we've talked
Uh-huh.
about this before, we've kind of brushed on it throughout this episode, but my deepest desire is I want to serve people the best way that I can, and I
Mm-hmm.
want to add value to their life. And when I
Mm-hmm.
see people, I don't just see a random person. I see someone who, when I look at myself, I see the same things in them. I know that there's something inside of them that God put there.
Yeah.
God's placed certain desires, passions, whatever, right there inside of them. And I want to draw those things out. I want to see people live up to the passions and the callings that God has for their life because it's there. The potential is
Mm-hmm.
there. So I want to pull that out of them because, honestly, I didn't have, a mentor pulling that stuff out of me. It just took a whole bunch of life lessons. Looking
Right.
back, I'm glad things happened the way it did for me. But what I would love to do now is to help assist in that process and help people self discover and find out what God's put inside of them. So ultimately, that's what I do with my whole life, whether it be, through my insurance practice or whether I'm doing real estate or coaching. That's that's my deepest desire.
It says Houston's recording has stopped. Is it
Okay.
showing your recording still?
I think I'm back. I'm on Do Not Disturb, but a call came through. I don't know how that happened.
Okay. It looks like it's back, so we'll edit this
Yeah,
part out.
cool.
Carry on your thought.
Yeah, my deepest desire is I just want to help pull that out of people because I know everyone has potential. I know everybody's got a gift and a calling, and I want to help
Hmm.
them self discover. So, no matter the context, whether it's business, their personal life, whatever, I want to help assist in that process. So,
So you and I have an event coming up. You're one of our keynote speakers at Elevate 2024, September 26th at 10 a.m. sharp at the Maverick Event Space. So thinking about that, Houston, what is it that you hope you're going to share with us? As I said, you're one of the keynote speakers. You're going to share, and what's the one thing that you hope someone takes away as a result of hearing from you that day?
yeah, I want people to know that where they're at is not necessarily their reality. It's not necessarily what all God has planned for them, but there's actually much, much more, right?
Mhm.
And they may find themselves in a spot where I've found myself several times in my past of feeling like I was stuck, that there wasn't a clear way to or a clear path to where I wanted to go. I want people to know that if you just take that first step, and it's not easy, but I will say it's as simple as taking a step, right? If you take that first step, let those things chase after you. Because if you take that step in the right direction, God is going to start bringing things into your path. You're going to get random phone calls. You're going to have opportunities that come up out of nowhere. It never fails. I tell you what, every time I take a step in the direction that I want to go, even if it's not easy, the weirdest thing, man, like God just starts bringing opportunity after opportunity, and I'm able to level up. The other thing that I want to accomplish, and I hope that the people understand when I speak, is that you know. Let me pause here for a second. I want to make sure I get the right language here.
Take your time.
Um, I went blank. There was one
All
more.
right.
That's what I was talking about. Sometimes when I say two things. Um, hmm. Oh, here it is.
Oh, you waiting on me?
Yeah, sorry.
That's
I
all
wanted to
right.
make sure
You're
you were
good.
good. Okay,
You're good.
sweet. So the topic of my talk is the law of capacity. I don't know if that's an actual law, just kind of made it up.
It is
However,
now.
yeah, it is now, and I see it in my life. When you read the Bible, and it says I believe it's in Matthew, you can't put new wine in an old wineskin, right? You can't do it because it'll burst. It cannot hold that new wine. That is a principle that it's universal. That's in every area of life. And I view myself as that wineskin, right? Everybody's this wineskin, and you can't hold new things. If you desire to be something, to do something, to accomplish whatever, you actually cannot hold that thing that you're asking God for if you haven't changed as a person. You have to become a new person to hold the new thing that God wants to give you, right? I think
Right.
back to 2022. Self-employed. I was doing the same thing I'm doing now, and I was making great money. However, I didn't see myself leveling up in life, and I was frustrated. It was about midway through 2022, and I found myself just really desperate, like, God, what's going on? I'm making great money, have a great life. Really, ultimately, my life is great. However, I'm not really getting ahead, and I'm not leveling up. Like, what's the deal? And that was my prayer, right? And God spoke so clearly to me. He said this. He said, "Because I don't trust you." And that at the time did not fit into my theology. I did not think that God would say something like that to me. I didn't think he would say that to anybody. But that was the reality. He said that he did not trust me. My first response back to him was, "Make me make you trust me."
Mm.
So he took me on a journey, and I'm still on that journey of I'm becoming a new person who God trusts to hold the thing that he desires for my life, right?
Yep.
It would be unfair and unloving for God to just give you something you desire if you are not the wineskin that's able to hold that new thing. Because what would happen? It would break, it would all fall apart, and ultimately it wouldn't be good for you, right? And so God desires for us to level up in our life, become a new person, new mindset, new motivations, whatever the case, right? So that he can give us the things that he desires for our life, right? And
That's
so
good.
those are my big two takeaways. Those right there. So yeah,
Man, that's good, Houston. I'm
yeah,
excited to hear more about it
yeah,
next month at the event.
yeah.
Well, I appreciate you being here with us today, Houston. And I learned from one of my coaches. Her name's Diana Kokoska. Future guest, by the way, that I'm pumped about. She taught me this when I was meeting with her in Atlanta several years ago, that until we identify the lesson, we don't get to move forward. So
Mm,
I love how you could look back over these seasons over the past 10, 12 years and identify the lessons. And if what Diana taught me is true, which I believe it is, then you've earned the right to move forward in life continually because you've continued to identify the lessons. So thank you for sharing with us.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
It's one thing to learn our lesson ourselves, where we have the bumps and scars and bruises, and yet it's more wise if we can learn from each other and avoid those bumps, scratches, and I was going to say screws, but
Hey, whatever.
bumps, scratches, and
Yeah,
whatever else. So thank you
yeah,
for being with us, Houston.
yeah,
Thank you for freely sharing with us, man.
yeah. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. I really
Yeah, my
appreciate it.
pleasure.
Yeah.